You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest Doug Bennett. Doug is running in the 10th Congressional District Republican primary. We're taping this on June 29th, 2017. We've got about 9 months to the primary. After that, another 8 or 9 months to the general election. So everybody's getting an early start here.
Very early.
All right. A bit about our guest. He lives in Deerfield, that's in the 10th Congressional District. Where is the 10th Congressional District? Very roughly, more about this as we get into the show. Starts in Glencoe, goes up through Highland Park when we're near the lake. That's Lake Michigan, of course, and keeps going north up through Zion, and then out to the west to places like Round Lake and Grays Lake, and of course along the way, Libertyville, Lake Forest, Lake Bluff. Give you an idea of where the 10th Congressional District is. It's currently, the congressman for the 10th is Democrat Brad Schneider, but it was held by a Republican for more than 3 decades, from 1979 to 2012. First it was John Porter for several decades, then Mark Kirk for another decade, then for a shorter time Robert Dole, then along came Brad Schneider.
And then Dole, and then
and
Schneider.
Then Dole and Schneider. And you would like the next guy, next congressperson.
To be a Republican, obviously, me.
That would be Doug Bennett.
Yes.
You're running against Jeremy Wines.
In the primary?
In the Republican primary. So that's what we're talking about. You are a
Republican.
Brad Schneider is
He's a Democrat.
And what is Jeremy?
He has a lot of Democratic positions.
What does he describe himself as?
He might call himself an independent,
I've heard him say, I've read, he's an independent. And that's good in the 10th and running in the general because they like independent-minded folks. Dole was sort of an independent, before him Kirk, before him Porter. But they also, I think if you're a Republican, you might want him to be independent-minded, but you want him to be a member of the Republican Party. You want him to have Republican ideals. Do you qualify?
I definitely qualify.
We'll have Jeremy here and we'll find out if he qualifies. We'll have Brad here and find out if he qualifies as a Democrat. And then we'll have a clash of ideas. That's our goal, to bring you, the viewers, a sense of who the folks are who are running in the 10th, what their positions are. So really, without any further ado, you know, the major issue as we're taping this on the 29th of June is Obamacare. So it was a big issue in 2010 when it passed. Republicans were running against it. They brought back the majority in 2010, I think, by running against Obamacare, right?
In the House.
In the House. And then eventually they got it in the Senate. So let me ask you, Doug Bennett, do you favor the repeal and replacement of Obamacare?
Yes, we want to get rid of Obamacare. It's a problem.
And that bill, there was a bill that passed the House, that was, they said, to repeal and replace, and they were trying to get, this all has to be done by party. Obamacare was passed by just Democrats, I believe.
Absolutely.
And now the repeal, if it happens apparently, will be done just by Republicans. That was the bill that passed in the House. The Senate has 52 Republicans. They can lose 2 and have Pence as the tiebreaker, and they can still repeal it. Can't lose more. So as we're taping this on the 29th, there seem to be not 50 Republicans, but somewhat fewer who are in favor of that bill. So let me ask you, Doug Bennett, what should be the focus of the repeal of Obamacare? Does the Senate have it right, and can they marshal the support to get this done?
They have a right to try, but whether this is the right bill or not is open to debate, and they have a duty to make the best bill possible.
What's the essence? So the main stopping point, it seems to me, actually what seems to you, for Obamacare, what is the problem? There's a conservative group, there's a more moderate group of Republicans in the Senate, right?
I think there are...
What's the main issue between these folks?
One is the fact that indigent care was the expansion of Medicaid, which...
Medicaid. So that's the big deal. Obamacare, in a sense, was an expansion of Medicaid. It lowered the eligibility requirements. A lot of folks, they may be earning $60,000, maybe more a year, became eligible in many states for Medicaid, right?
They did.
And that was not the intent. Originally, Medicaid was for the poor, for single moms, for children. It was not to be a middle-class program, and it became one, sort of. I mean, 60,000 is kind of almost middle class, isn't it?
And in some states, they accepted it, in some states they didn't. So there's a patchwork of different states with different understandings of what it should happen.
So how do we solve this?
Well,
If you were in Congress, and if you were, I know you'd be in the House, but they're eventually going to have to work together to iron out anything they do. So what would be your 2 cents if you were representing
well,
the
the
10th
first thing I do
Congressional
is they're trying to do too much at once, which is the problem with the current Obamacare bill. They should separate it out into pre-existing conditions, then indigent care, and then clean it up. They're not doing that. They're trying to do it all at one time. That's a problem. If they
So
got
when
it
you
in
say
the
it all
right-
at one time, you mean separate bills or separate discussions or what?
Separate bills, separate discussions,
First bill would do what?
pre-existing conditions, making sure if you were covered when you got sick or ill, you would be covered for that sickness or illness.
Make sure, button that up. People want that different than the way, they like that about Obamacare. They want people who have the pre-existing conditions to be able to get coverage economically, right?
They want to
I'm
know.
not sure Obamacare does that, but people in this country want that, right?
They want to know that if they played fair by the rules, they bought insurance, that they would be secure from financial disaster.
So we can't do the whole show on that, but that's number one. That has to be buttoned down. Number two?
Indigent care, what do we do with people who can't pay? How do we find a way to fund it, and who pays for that? And we can have a really good discussion about that, but when we put it all together, we get the same kind of problems that Obamacare had, where they would do one thing in one part of the legislation and something in another part that just torpedoed it.
So what's the Republican solution that's different from the Democrats on Medicaid? Is there some overriding principle that you sense that says, here's what the Republicans are saying, here's what the Democrats are saying?
Well, one question is this a federal responsibility? Is it a state responsibility? Is it a local responsibility? What's the sharing of that? Because I think Ronald Reagan is the person who we passed a law saying that if you're bleeding in front of a hospital, they have to treat you. So,
well, what's the eligibility? Should it be for people right now, as I say, it goes 3.5 times poverty, which means 70,000 for family income. Do you think that's too high?
well, the reason that's so high is that if you're on an Obamacare plan, the deductibles are $12,000 or more, and that's not affordable. And so what they did is they raised the Medicaid numbers.
So
Because
people can't afford Obamacare, so
They
give
put
them
them on-
Medicaid.
Right, which is actually, it's a resource stripping program too, where you could, if you make money later, they can come back for some
So
of
the
that money.
Republicans need to figure out how to get Obamacare down so that it's more attractive economically, which would back people out of Medicaid onto the federal program. Because, well, a federal program. Of course, they're repealing Obamacare, so it would be really figuring out how to get private insurance, lower premiums that people could buy, not from the government, but in the private market, better deductibles, and then they're off Medicaid. And
They're on their own.
And so how do you do that? How do you get premiums down for insurance, healthcare insurance?
Well, you get,
As a general principle.
well,
What is the one word I'm looking for?
competition.
Yeah, because you've studied economics. Competition. It's the patron saint of the consumer. If you have more competition, if you have, like, what's that word that people talk about across states?
Interstate lines,
Right now, insurance companies are inhibited from competing,
across state lines.
but you would like to change that.
I think that should change.
Republicans want to change it.
Republicans mostly all want to change that.
That's a Republican idea.
It is definitely
Does
Republican.
Brad Schneider want to do that?
I don't think he wants to touch Obamacare, as far as I can tell.
Jeremy Weiss, what does he do? What do you do now?
I can't find any information on his healthcare plans, so you'll find out for me.
And what is your website?
DouglasRBennett.org.
DouglasRBennett.org, and that is with one S, right?
One
Okay,
S.
Okay, all right. So this sort of takes care of that. I know education, affordability of education is an important issue, right?
I would think so. We have a lot of people, and the college prices are staggering for children going to school.
And what are we going to do to make college more affordable?
What I would say is that we need to get colleges, out of the student loan business where they don't belong, because they're a predatory lender almost. We need to get universities out of the distribution of need-based aid, because what they've done is taken your personal financial information and used it to set the highest possible price. they've taken advantage of their situation, and we need to basically cut the universities out of that business.
Because we need to have more competition. We need to have the universities competing for what?
For the students.
For the students. So producers are competing for the consumers. Again, like in healthcare, that would, if you have more competition, and if you give the money directly, the assistance to the student, right?
To the student or the parents. But the other issue is that you can imagine what your electric bill might look like if ComEd got to look at your tax forms before they set a price. What happens is no one sets the same price.
So your point is keep the information that proprietary with the families.
With the families.
And because if they find out how much income you have, they will raise the price. If it's a lower income, they'll lower the price. It's called price discrimination, which is generally illegal unless it's done by the government. Okay.
Right.
So Brad Schneider, he would go along with you? He wants more competition just like you? He wants to empower the parents and the families?
I haven't seen him ever propose anything on education that made any...
Jeremy, he would do that? He's a Republican, you're a Republican? Or is he an independent? He's an independent. So does he have a different view?
I don't know what his solution is, but I heard he said he wanted like cradle to grave education, which sounds...
Odd phrasing to use. Let me see, cradle to grave. Where do I hear that? What is it like?
Bernie
Socialism?
Sanders' website.
Socialism is cradle. No, he says cradle, to be fair, he says cradle to career, right? But it is an odd phrasing for a Republican because it's picking up off of Sanders' cradle to grave. But let's be fair, Jeremy, you come on and you speak for yourself. You come on Public Affairs, talk to the people in the 10th Congressional District, because that's what a Republican primary is supposed to be about. It's competition.
And information.
And information. Okay, so we're going here. We're moving along. We've got healthcare solved. We've got affordability of education. Jobs, we got a solution there? I mean, really, we've had a very sluggish recovery under Obama for the prior 8 years. The worst post-World War II economic recovery ever. Okay? Very slow. At best, 2% real GDP growth, maybe 1% some years, 1.5%. We would like to have 3 or 4%, right?
4% would be very good.
How do we do that?
I think we should cut tax rates on companies, allowing them to innovate, and we should reduce regulations, and we should free up the financial sector to have a little more latitude to take some chances to fund innovative companies to generate new jobs.
So we need to deregulate things. We need to let the free market be more capable of meeting the needs and wants of consumers. And that's sort of a Trump thing, right?
Yes, it is.
He's in favor of deregulation. That is one of some areas President Trump is not as Republican as some people would like. But on that, he's in sync with Ronald Reagan.
Free markets are a Republican standard value that...
You would like to see less regulation in general, right? You want to see some regulation, but you'd like to see less?
Less, yeah.
Okay, so if the free market can take over, can be more innovative, can think of ways of doing things differently, they can create jobs, they can hire more people, we can get closer to 4% economic growth, and life is good.
Life is good.
Brad Schneider, he'd sign on to that?
He did sign on to 4% growth. He just doesn't know how to get there.
He doesn't know.
He doesn't know how to get there. That's
Brad, you come on here and you tell us, because we're fair, we're balanced. We want Brad Schneider talking to the folks along the 10th Congressional District, especially in the general election. But Brad, you can come on now. I don't know if you've got competition in the Democratic primary, but you know, the race is on. And Jeremy, you should be here too, right? Because does Jeremy favor this? Generally, he's pretty good on it. You guys might be pretty close.
Close on economics.
And you're both pretty Republican, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Would you say he's independent there? There he's a Republican, right?
Free markets, and that's a Republican thing.
Jeremy, you come on and you let us know, okay? I mean, the one aspect, the difference between you and Jeremy might be is who's behind you, right?
I would say so.
So who is behind Jeremy?
You'd have to ask him. I think.
Come on, you know. Come on, there are rumors. People know.
Well,
who's running the campaign?
He's got access to money as a lobbyist that from his prior life.
Before you even get to the lobbyist, who's James Slepian? You know that name, right?
Chip Englander is...
Slepian ran Dole's campaign?
Chip Englander ran...
Slepian's running Jeremy's campaign?
I guess so.
Chip Englander, he was Governor Rauner's campaign manager. He's running this campaign?
I'm not involved.
That's what rumors are. Rumors are, but
have it.
Jeremy, we could be wrong. I don't know. Let us know. Mike Shrimpf, a former top spokesperson for Governor Rauner. He's now involved in the Jeremy campaign, right? And so it sounds like he's got sort of the establishment, would you call it?
In some ways.
He's got the chalk, I think, right? I mean, that's sort of, they might say Jeremy wins, he's the favorite because he's got the chalk. What do you got?
We got the committeemen and all the people in the Republican Party that we've worked with for the last 4 or 5 years. And
what do these committeemen do? Let people know, if you're like in a village like Deerfield.
If you were in Chicago, you'd call them precinct captains, but they're elected. They go out among they carry your literature, they talk to their neighbors, they're involved.
They are where the rubber hits the road.
They are the people who work every day to
Have you been a committeeman?
Yes.
Has Jeremy been a committeeman?
I don't think so, no.
So that's an advantage.
I know so, no.
It seems, but Jeremy, you let us know if we're wrong, because we're fair. But it seems like that's an advantage as you troop around to these folks. You're going to be looking for endorsements, and you're going to say to these committeemen, what's your pitch?
Well, we've worked together for a long time. You know who I am. You know what I stand for. We've worked on all
What do you stand for?
We stand for free markets, limited constitutional government, traditional values, competition.
Yes, you believe in the Constitution?
Absolutely.
Okay, the U.S. Constitution. So they know that about you, certainly in Deerfield, because that's where you're from. You've been there most of your adult life, right?
Yes.
That's in the 10th Congressional District. You're a 10th Congressional District guy. You've been helping to elect other Republicans for various offices, right?
Yep.
Now you're looking for them to
Help in return in some ways, yeah.
It's only fair.
We'll find out.
We're fair and balanced. But Jeremy would have some ideas about that. So Jeremy, you come on. We're going to get in touch. We're going to have you on, we hope, because what's the one word that comes out of this show? It's really coming up a lot.
It's competition.
Competition. I love that word. I really do.
Because you're a Milton Friedman economist.
Well, that's my bias, folks. If I have a bias, not a Democrat, not a Republican, not even an independent, I'm a journalist. But if I have a bias, it's toward free market economics. I think competition is hard to argue against. But if somebody wants to, Brad, if you want to argue against Jeremy, anybody else, you come on public affairs, because I think it's very hard to argue that competition is not a good thing. You believe it's a good thing, right?
It's absolutely well.
Okay, so you're the grassroots guy, you're the guy who's worked with the committeemen, you've worked where the rubber hits the road. Wines, he has been, as you pointed out, he's been working with APEC, which is a good organization,
yes.
Right? It's a pro-Israel organization. You're pro-Israel?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Everybody in the 10th district is pretty much.
So yes, and so in that sense, it's a good thing. But, and he's worked with the Republican Jewish Coalition, RJC. That's a good organization,
yes,
right?
It is.
But the thing is, he's more of a lobbyist, right?
That's his background.
That's his background. I mean, I don't think he'd dispute that. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with lobbyists, especially for a good cause. You're lobbying for a good cause. But it's a little different. You're more on the business side. Where have you worked?
I worked at Oracle. I've worked at GlaxoSmithKline, a major pharma company. We've worked at Interstate Batteries. There's a whole...
What do you do? What kind of stuff? What's you? What do you do?
We implement technical systems.
Yeah. Okay. So you're a computer guy, systems guy, business guy,
math
consultant.
Guy.
You listen to people, what their problems are, and you help them solve them, right?
That's what I do for a living.
Okay. So Jeremy's going to try to do that in the 10th. He's going to listen to people's problems and help them solve them. You're going to listen to people's problems and help them solve them. Brad's listening to people's problems and help them solve. It's a question for you folks to decide who does it best, right?
That's right.
And for you to help start deciding, you need to hear these people, like you're hearing Doug. We hope you'll hear Jeremy. We hope you'll hear Brad. Tell the positions, and then you will have this information, and you'll be a better informed consumer. And what's that word? What's that word will happen when we have three people?
Competition.
In the Republican primary, we'll have competition. We don't know if we have it in the Democratic primary, but then the general election will have?
More competition.
Love that word. Okay.
I know you do.
If this is like a drinking game, if you're watching this program, and every time I said competition, you could have a drink, you would be a wash. You would be so drunk. But no, it's probably not a good thing to say. Okay, I'm getting off topic. So we've covered jobs, we've covered economic growth, we've covered health care. We've still got about 10 minutes left. There are a few things we haven't covered. Foreign policy.
Foreign policy.
ISIS. Go after ISIS, right?
Hard.
Hard.
Yes.
The president wants to go after ISIS, right?
and I support
You
that,
support him. Hey,
absolutely.
by the way, do you support Donald Trump? Did you support him when he was running for president in the general election?
I voted for him in the general election,
You preferred Donald to Hillary, right?
absolutely. I voted
But
for
in
him.
the primary, you might have preferred some other people.
I liked Scott Walker from Wisconsin nearby, but he didn't make it past the first bend.
So once you get to the general election, you're a Republican, you tend to support the Republicans, right?
You tend to support Republicans.
Brad Schneider probably supporting the Democrat, whether he was supporting Bernie or Hillary in the primary,
Right.
probably supported Hillary in the general.
I would
right?
expect so.
And Jeremy supported,
You'd have to ask him, I don't think
have
he's
you
said-
heard him say, because you've been at some joint events, he must have
Not
been asked,
one.
right? What?
We've not been at one
You've
joint
not-
event.
You have to get going at those, so you've not heard him asked, you just don't know.
Nope.
So Jeremy, come on and tell people, did you support Trump? Do you support him now? Inquiring minds want to know. And where you say it, just come on public affairs. Any case, you and Trump are in sync there, might be not in sync in some other areas, but in terms of being hard, tough on ISIS,
Radical Islamic terrorists, go out, take them out.
just like we did with Al-Qaeda, just like we're doing with what is it called? Self-grown radicals, self-grown terrorists, homegrown terrorists, whatever we call. They're sort of like
Self-radicalized.
self-radicalized. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. Self-radicalized. We got those terrorists out there. We got ISIS. We got Al-Qaeda. The main thing is this is a problem. You need to have a focused effort. Do we have that? Did we have that under Obama?
I think he wanted to be nicer to them and hoped they'd be understanding, and that doesn't work with these guys.
Got to identify the enemy and go after them, right? Okay. So, sanctuary cities. How do you feel about that?
Completely wrong thing to do.
Because?
Because what it does is allows predators back on the street. A lot of the people who get picked up on the sanctuary cities are picked up because of crimes, and then they decide to let them go. And I completely don't support that.
Because they don't work with ICE, the immigration
The
control,
immigration
whatever it is.
control,
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
So that, like the girl in San Francisco who was shot by a repeat offender, where we could have taken him out of
We
circulation.
now have Kate's Law, right? You've heard of
Yeah.
Kate's Law?
Which is proposed.
Which is about, maybe it's passing now, it might be passing as we speak to Congress. It may have Democratic support.
One would hope.
You know, the leadership said, look, they're not so enthusiastic about repealing sanctuary cities or blocking them or penalizing them. But when it came to Kate's Law, the Democratic leadership said, you folks read it carefully and you decide. So I think they think that might be a popular law. They're not telling Democrats to go out and vote against something that's
One
popular.
would be nice to put the safety of the people in front
What does
of.
Kate's Law do?
It says that if you're a violent offender, then we can immediately deport you and take you out of
Which
the country.
makes sense. Or if you're a violent offender, they ought to be serving time here. They ought to be deported. They shouldn't be allowed back in if you've deported them and they're a violent offender.
If we pick them up again, we
It
just
almost
put them in
thinks you
prison.
wouldn't need a law for that sort of thing, but I guess you do. The Paris Accord. So Trump has received a lot of criticism for that because he said, I want nothing to do with this Paris Accord. Right or wrong?
I think it's the right decision.
How come?
I think that what we're doing is we're agreeing to massively cut back on our economy and not getting anything in return for it from anybody else. So I don't think it's a
And
good
how are we
idea.
massively cutting back?
We are trying to reduce our energy footprint dramatically for who we are, and we're not really as concerned about China
And
or
China,
India.
China's going to do the same thing?
China's not at all bound by
Maybe
the same-
20 years later they might do it.
Someday, somehow.
India's going to do the same thing?
That's the theory. If they do it now,
But they're not doing it now.
not doing
So
it.
we're doing it now, so we're at an economic disadvantage.
Unilateral disarmament, I
And
think
Trump
you
says,
call
why
it.
should we do that? I think Trump's right about that. Do you think so?
I would agree with him on this. I already said
Brad, what do you think? Brad favors the Paris Accord probably, right?
that. I would assume he does.
So if you do, Brad, come on and defend it. Persuade the people in the 10th you're right. I was wrong. But Jeremy, where's Jeremy on this? Do you know?
No idea.
He's independent,
No idea.
so we don't know.
You have to go
Okay.
ask him, like you said.
Jeremy, come on and tell us. Okay, let's go over the social issues. Tip into that. You know, gays, gun, God, and abortion. Got 3 minutes, 3 issues. Very easy, okay? Gays, same-sex marriage, that's kind of over. The Supreme Court said, that's it, same-sex marriage is legal, right? Is it still an
That-
issue in the 10th?
It's approved by the Supreme Court. It's the law of the land. And unless the Supreme Court changes its mind in the far future, that's the law.
What does Jeremy say about that?
I think he's for it.
He's for same-sex marriage?
Yeah.
What about you?
I would have opposed it, but I've been
It's a law.
overruled by the court.
But to the extent you can, you will try to support traditional marriage?
Absolutely.
To the extent Jeremy could, would he?
You have to ask him.
This is the Republican primary, we should know, because that is an important issue for the Republican
For
primary.
some Republicans, it's a very important
And then we'll
issue.
have to take it when we go to the general election. Abortion, what's your view, pro-life, pro-choice?
I'm pro-life.
Pro-life. Okay, and Jeremy would be?
I think he's 1,000% pro-choice.
And this is the Republican primary. What do you think most Republicans are voting? Look, in the Republican primary, you have the activists, right?
The party itself is primarily pro-life.
Primarily pro-life, okay. Gun control?
I support all the amendments, the Second Amendment rights, so
Concealed carry, that's actually the law of the land now. You have to, cities, if they don't, or states, if they don't have concealed carry, they have to set out a reasonable way to allow people to have concealed carry. You support that?
and once again, we're back to the Supreme Court has already decided this. I support
You
it.
support Brad Snyder? Would he have supported that, do you think, before that?
He would not have ruled in that way if
But
he
now he
was on the
sort of
Supreme
has to,
Court.
because now he has to, because it's the law of the land, but we don't know. Brad, you come tell us, you want to change it? Jeremy, what say you? Pro-gun control, more pro-gun owner rights, what? Some balance? We don't know. We have to see, we have to hear from him, okay? And so let's talk a little bit in the last minute or so. Just talk tell us a little bit about the 10th Congressional District. Okay. Well, no, talk about the primary. And the primary is March, right?
Primaries March.
There'll be how many voters and the likely Republican voters based on past history?
4 years ago, in a very contested gubernatorial primary, there were 30,000 Republican primary voters. And that was Rauner against Dillard and Brady and a bunch of people. It's
So
very active.
30,000. So this time around, you expect
25 maybe?
maybe 25, which means you win that primary with 13,000 votes.
That's right. Very few people are going to go out and decide primaries.
The core, where is the core? I mean, there are 47 suburbs in the 10th, but the core vote in the Republican primary comes out of where?
I think it stretches in a line. It goes from Mundelein, it's in Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, it's in Libertyville, and it goes down into Wheeling and Buffalo Grove. It starts going down all the way toward Northbrook and Glencoe and those areas.
So those areas you mentioned, Libertyville, Lake Forest, Grays Lake, which you didn't, I'll throw that in there, Northbrook, Mundelein, Glenview, Buffalo Grove, Highland Park, Waukegan, Deerfield, Mount Prospect, Lake Bluff. That's about a third in terms of the number of suburbs, but it accounts for, my guess, about two-thirds of the Republican primary vote. So you want everybody. You're going after all the votes, all 47 suburbs. But folks, you have to know, those suburbs I just mentioned, like Highland Park is probably more Democratic, but it's large. So fewer Republicans, but in total, it's the number of Republicans in each area. That's what counts.
Right. So it's a large area, but it's not very many Republicans.
So the main thing is that, one, you can find out more. You've probably seen it as we've been talking, but you can find out more about Doug by going to douglasrbennett.org. You can write him, Bennett D, at douglasrbennett.org, Douglas with one S. You can follow him on Twitter at Doug R. Bennett. By the way, you can follow me at Jeff Berkowitz, PA. And the main thing, we said competition, but really the main thing, you come back next week